Have you ever met someone by pure chance? And that moment changed everything. On a cold Denver night, a poor waitress heard a dog barking in the rain. But she didn't know that following that sound would lead her to a dying veteran, a forgotten past, and a miracle that only God Himself could have written. This isn't just another story. It's proof that faith, kindness, and love can still rewrite destiny. Stay until the end, because what happens next will touch your soul and maybe even change how you see life itself. If this story moves you, please subscribe, leave a comment about your thoughts, and share this video. Together, let's spread kindness and let God's light shine through our small acts of love. Thank you for being here. May God bless you and everyone you care about. The afternoon rain in the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, came down in a thin, steady veil, blurring the distant foothills into gray silhouettes. The wind was cold and raw, carrying the metallic scent of wet asphalt and the faint echo of passing freight trains. It was the kind of rain that turned alleys into streams and pushed people indoors, leaving only the stubborn or the lost walking under the gray sky. Jack Miller was both. He moved along the cracked sidewalk of a service road lined with old motels and shuttered repair shops, his boots splashing through puddles without care. Jack was in his early 40s, but looked older. Life had aged him the way wind sculpts rock, slow and relentless. He stood about 6 feet tall, lean but solid, with broad shoulders that had carried too much weight for too long. His face was hard-edged and weather-beaten, his beard uneven, peppered with gray. The thin scar over his left eyebrow caught the light when he turned his head. His dark hair was kept short, more out of habit than vanity, and the deep creases around his eyes suggested a man who'd seen too much sun, dust, and loss. Jack's olive-green jacket, a military surplus he'd kept from his army days, was soaked through at the shoulders. The patch where his name had once been sewn was long gone, but the ghost outline still clung to the fabric. He carried himself like a soldier even when no one was watching, straight-backed, alert, always scanning his surroundings as if expecting trouble to appear from nowhere. His gait was slow that day, heavier than usual, the fatigue deep in his bones rather than in his muscles. Beside him trotted Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd, his fur glistening under the drizzle. The dog was large, powerful, with a black saddle running along his back and tan fur down his sides. His chest was broad, his legs strong, his ears upright like antennae tuned to the smallest shift in sound. Rex's amber eyes stayed fixed on Jack, reading him the way only a loyal animal could. Every so often, the dog nudged Jack's leg as if to ask if everything was all right. Jack reached down and gave the dog a pat. "We're fine, buddy. Just the cold getting in the joints," he muttered, though the words were more for himself. His voice was low and rough, like gravel rolled in whiskey. They passed a grocery store clerk standing under the awning, smoking despite the rain. The man barely glanced up, just nodded when Jack walked by. It was that kind of neighborhood. People kept to themselves. A few cars rolled past, wipers thudding rhythmically, headlights cutting through the fog. Denver's downtown lights glowed faintly to the east, but out here on the edge, life moved slower, poorer, quieter. Jack had lived like that since leaving the army 12 years ago. Once he had been a field mechanic, fixing engines in the sand-blasted heat of Afghanistan, keeping convoys alive. Now he fixed broken transmissions and oil, leaks for anyone who could pay, and sometimes for those who couldn't. The war had left him with steady hands and a heart that no longer trusted peace. There had been nights when he'd wake up sweating, his mind replaying the sound of explosions like thunder behind closed eyes. He had learned to keep his pain private. That was the soldier's way. Patch it up and keep moving. Today, though, something inside him felt wrong. A pressure sat heavy behind his ribs, not sharp but deep, like a weight slowly tightening. He told himself it was just fatigue, maybe too much coffee, maybe too little food. He'd skipped lunch again, saving what cash he had for dog food and rent. A gust of wind swept down the street, bending the bare branches of a tree and scattering trash across the sidewalk. Rex barked once, his tail stiffening as thunder rumbled in the distance. The sky had darkened to the color of gunmetal. Jack smiled faintly, though his lips barely moved. "Easy, boy," he said. "It's just the storm talking." He stopped at the corner of a small auto garage, its neon sign flickering weakly, Henderson's Auto Service. It was where he worked part-time, fixing cars for old Henderson, a man in his 70s who still insisted on using paper receipts and radio weather reports. The shop was closed now, its steel door pulled down, the smell of oil and rubber still clinging to the air. Jack leaned against the wall for a moment, feeling the cold concrete through his jacket. Rex sat beside him, ears twitching, eyes alert. The dog sensed something was wrong before Jack did. His breathing was shallow, uneven. The pressure in his chest sharpened, then spread down his left arm. He pressed his hand against his heart, trying to catch his breath. The world around him seemed to slow. The sound of traffic dulled. The rain grew distant. The streetlight above flickered. Rex barked again, louder this time, circling him in distress. Jack tried to take a step, but his knees buckled. The pain burst through him, sudden and absolute. He fell to the ground, the wet pavement striking his shoulder. His breath came in gasps. Rex's paws splashed around him, barking, whining, nudging his face with a wet nose. "Rex, stay," Jack managed to whisper, though his voice broke halfway through the word. The dog didn't obey, not fully. He stood over his master, barking furiously toward the street, calling for help in the only way he knew how. Across the road, two teenagers hurried by under a shared umbrella, glancing over but not stopping. A delivery truck slowed, then drove on. The world kept moving, indifferent. Jack's vision blurred. The raindrops above seemed to fall in slow motion. Somewhere far away, he thought he heard the distant rumble of helicopter blades, the kind that had once meant rescue. He wanted to believe it was coming for him again. Rex barked louder, his fur soaked, his breath forming small clouds in the cold. He pawed at Jack's jacket, then ran a few steps toward the sidewalk, barking at the passers-by. But no one came. The rain kept falling, washing the oil stains from the curb into a dark river. The city lights shimmered in the puddles like ghosts. And then faintly, from down the street, a new sound joined the storm. The soft clatter of hurried footsteps splashing through water. A woman's voice called out, "Hey, are you okay?" Rex turned toward the sound, tail stiff, barking once in warning before wagging slightly in hope. The figure drew closer, her outline framed by the glow of a flickering street lamp, the first sign that help, at last, had noticed. The rain did not stop, but something in the air shifted. As if the city, for the first time that night, held its breath. Emily Parker had always hated the sound of rain on the gas station roof. It wasn't the gentle kind that lulled you to sleep. It was metallic, impatient, like 1,000 fingers drumming on tin. The pumps stood beneath their flickering canopy, empty at this late hour. The fluorescent lights above hummed, painting the wet pavement in harsh white and dull yellow. Emily rubbed her hands together, more out of boredom than cold, her breath forming faint ghosts in the air. She was 30 years old, a woman whose life had folded neatly into routine. Night shifts, quick meals, and quiet mornings spent nursing coffee that never stayed warm long enough. She was of medium height, slim from long hours on her feet, her body wiry rather than delicate. Her auburn hair, pulled into a practical ponytail, curled at the ends from the humidity, and the freckles across her fair skin seemed darker under the gas station lights. Her green eyes carried a certain tired kindness, the kind that noticed too much and forgot too little. She'd come to Denver from a small town 2 years earlier after her mother passed away, leaving behind a trail of unpaid hospital bills and a life that didn't fit anymore. Since then, Emily had lived in a small apartment behind the station, sharing walls with the hum of freezers and the smell of gasoline. She wasn't unhappy exactly, just restless, like someone waiting for a sign that life hadn't forgotten her. It was a quiet night, broken only by the buzz of a neon open sign and the rhythm of rain. She was restocking the cooler when she heard it, a sharp, desperate bark cutting through the storm. It came again, closer this time, echoing off the wet pavement. Emily frowned, setting down a pack of sodas and stepping outside. The street beyond the pumps was dimly lit, the storm pressing down on the city. In the distance, she saw movement, a German shepherd circling something on the ground. Her heart quickened. "Oh no," she whispered, grabbing her rain jacket from the hook and running into the downpour. When she reached the corner, she saw him. A man sprawled on the wet sidewalk, his jacket dark with rain, his hand clutching his chest. The dog, Rex, was barking wildly, then whimpering, pacing between Emily and his fallen master. Steam rose from the man's breath, shallow and quick. Emily dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear but urgency. She'd taken a community first aid course last year after watching a man collapse at the store and realizing she wouldn't have known what to do. Tonight, that training came flooding back. The man's lips were pale, his skin slick with sweat despite the cold. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Weak pulse, but still there. "Hey, hang in there," she said, pulling her phone from her jacket and dialing 911. "Yes, emergency. I've got a man down on Colfax and Willow, near Henderson's Auto." He's breathing, but not responsive. Rex whined, nosing Jack's hand, then looked up at her with pleading eyes. Emily reached out and stroked his soaked fur. "It's okay, boy. Help's coming." The dog's trembling eased just a little. She took off her jacket, folded it beneath Jack's head to lift it slightly, and kept talking. To him, to the dog, to herself. Anything to keep the fear out of the silence. "Come on, sir. You're going to be fine. I promise." Jack stirred faintly, his voice rough and broken. "Rex, don't let them take him." Emily bent closer, rain dripping from her hair onto his sleeve. "No one's taking him anywhere. He's right here, okay? He's safe." In the distance, sirens began to rise, faint at first, then growing. Relief flooded her chest. She looked around and saw a car pulling over nearby. Inside sat Officer Michael Torres, a local patrolman finishing his shift. Torres was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the calm focus of someone used to emergencies. His skin was tanned, his hair close-cropped, and a trimmed goatee framed his jaw. He had been a firefighter before joining the police. Leaving the job after an accident, took 2 friends and left him with a permanent limp. The limp hadn't slowed him down, only hardened his patience. He ran over, calling out, "Ma'am, what happened?" "I think he's having a heart attack," Emily replied quickly. "Ambulance is on the way." Torres knelt beside her, checking Jack's breathing, then nodded. "You did good calling early. Let's keep him stable." Rex barked when Torres reached for Jack, but Emily calmed the dog with a steady hand. "It's okay, boy. He's helping." Moments later, the red lights of an ambulance pierced the rain. Two paramedics jumped out, one older, stocky man named Carl and a young woman named Denise, her face half hidden under a hood. They moved with the synchronized precision of people who had done this 1,000 times. Carl asked short questions. Denise prepared the oxygen mask. Emily stepped back, still holding Rex's leash. When they lifted Jack onto the stretcher, his hand reached out, catching Emily's wrist weakly. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused but desperate. "Don't leave Rex. He hates the sirens." Emily swallowed hard, her voice soft but certain. "I'll take care of him. You have my word." The grip on her wrist loosened. The paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, the doors closing with a final metallic thud. The siren wailed, receding down the slick road toward the hospital. Torres turned to Emily. "You did the right thing. He's lucky you were close." She nodded, wiping the rain from her cheeks. Lucky had nothing to do with it. That dog saved him first. Rex stood beside her, tail low but eyes fixed on the disappearing ambulance. The rain soaked them both through, but Emily didn't move. She rested a hand on the dog's head, feeling the tremor of exhaustion beneath his fur. "Come on, boy," she murmured. "Let's get you out of this rain." The gas station lights glowed faintly behind them as she led Rex back across the street. Inside, the warm hum of the refrigerators felt almost comforting after the cold chaos outside. Rex followed obediently, shaking the water from his coat, spraying tiny droplets across the tile. Emily grabbed a towel from the counter, drying him gently. He leaned into her touch, sighing, a sound that almost broke her heart. She knelt, looking into his amber eyes. "You're a good boy, you know that? He's going to be okay." She wasn't sure if she believed it yet, but the words felt like a promise she needed to keep. Outside, the rain began to ease, tapering into a mist. The street quieted again, leaving only the echo of sirens fading into the distance. Emily sat on the floor beside Rex, her hand resting on his shoulder. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir. The sense that maybe, just maybe, tonight had brought her exactly where she was supposed to be. And somewhere across Denver, under hospital lights, Jack Miller still clung to life, unaware that the woman who had saved him was already keeping her word. Sitting beside his loyal dog through the long, uncertain night, the soft beeping of machines filled the dim room at the Denver Veterans Medical Center, a rhythm of life that seemed both fragile and stubborn. Rain still pressed against the windows, though now it was gentler, more like a whisper than a storm. The gray daylight filtering through the blinds fell across Jack Miller's face, pale, drawn, but alive. The deep lines along his cheeks had softened in sleep, and for the first time in years, his body wasn't fighting to keep moving. A hospital gown replaced the worn jacket he'd nearly died in, and a thin tube of oxygen looped beneath his nose. The heart monitor hummed beside him, its screen pulsing like a cautious promise. When Jack stirred, he blinked against the brightness, disoriented by the sterile smell and the too clean quiet. His chest ached, but the pain was dull now, manageable. The last thing he remembered clearly was the rain, Rex barking, and a woman's voice, calm, urgent, steady. That voice lingered in his mind, like an echo of warmth he hadn't felt in years. A soft knock came at the door. Jack turned his head and frowned as it opened. Emily Parker stepped inside, holding a small paper bag and looking hesitant, as though uncertain if she belonged here. Her hair, still damp from the morning drizzle, framed her face in loose waves. She wore a gray hoodie under a denim jacket, jeans dark with water near the cuffs. Rex padded quietly beside her, freshly cleaned, his fur brushed smooth and his collar shining. "Hey," she said, her voice gentle. "You're awake." Jack's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "Seems that way." His voice was rougher than he expected, rasping against a throat dry from oxygen and medication. He tried to sit up, but Emily hurried forward. "Don't strain yourself," she warned, setting the bag on the tray table. "Doctor said you need rest." Her tone was kind but firm, the same voice she'd used when coaxing Rex out of the rain. Jack obeyed, partly because it was easier, partly because it had been a long time since anyone had cared enough to tell him what to do. "Didn't expect to see you again," he murmured after a pause. Emily smiled slightly. "You asked me not to leave Rex. I keep my promises." Rex, hearing his name, wagged his tail and rested his chin on the edge of the bed. Jack reached out, his calloused hand finding the thick fur of the dog's neck. His eyes grew wet, though he said nothing. A nurse entered then. Clara Jensen, mid-40s, solidly built with gentle eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her brown hair was tied into a bun streaked with gray, and her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had seen both life and death too often to be shaken easily. "Mr. Miller," she greeted, checking his IV line. "You've got someone watching over you, I see. Both of them." She smiled at Emily, who nodded politely. Clara's tone softened. "You're lucky, you know. Another 10 minutes out there, and it might have been too late." Jack exhaled slowly. "Wouldn't be the first close call." The nurse's brows lifted. "You military?" He nodded once. "Army, Maintenance Corps, Afghanistan, 2 tours." "That explains the scars," Clara said, jotting a note on the chart. "And the stubbornness." Jack almost smiled again. That part never left. When she left, the room settled into quiet again. Emily sat down on the visitor's chair, folding her hands in her lap. "She said you were lucky," she began. "You don't look like someone who believes in luck." Jack stared at the ceiling, the fluorescent lights humming softly. "Luck ran out a long time ago." Emily tilted her head, studying him. "You really believe that?" He didn't answer right away. "I've had my share of chances, wasted most of them." She waited, sensing there was more. After a long pause, he went on, voice low. "When I came home, everything felt different. My wife, she'd waited through 1 deployment, but not 2. My son was 8 then. He barely remembered me. By the time I found steady work again, they'd both moved on. Guess I couldn't blame them. I didn't know how to live without a war." Emily looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry." Jack shook his head. "Don't be. I made my choices. After that, it was just me and Rex." He scratched behind the dog's ear. "Found him at a shelter 3 winters ago. They said he was too old to train, too stubborn to adopt. Guess we had that in common." Emily smiled faintly. "He didn't seem stubborn last night. More like the only one who knew what to do." "That's Rex," Jack said. "Always knows before I do. Saved my life more than once." The monitor beeped steadily, and for a moment the two of them sat in silence, listening to the rain tapping faintly against the glass. There was a sense of stillness that didn't feel empty, just quiet enough for truth to settle. Emily glanced at the paper bag she'd brought. "I brought you something. It's not much, just coffee and a sandwich from the diner. Figured hospital food isn't exactly great." Jack chuckled weakly. "You figured right." She placed the cup on his tray, careful not to disturb the wires. The smell of real coffee filled the room, warm and familiar. He took a slow sip, eyes closing briefly in appreciation. "That's the best thing I've tasted in months." "I'll take that as a compliment," she said. He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You didn't have to come here." "I know," she said simply. "But I wanted to." Jack's gaze dropped to Rex again. "You've already done more than enough." "Maybe," Emily said. "But maybe people aren't supposed to stop at enough." Her words lingered between them, heavier than she meant them to be. She stood, then, smoothing her jacket. "I'll come back tomorrow, check in on you both. Rex needs his walk anyway." Jack looked at her, something almost vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, "I'm not afraid of dying. I can't stand the thought of him being alone." She met his gaze, her voice firm. "Then you'd better focus on getting better, because he's not going to listen to anyone else." Jack's laugh was small but real. "You sound like someone who gives orders for a living." "Just during emergencies," she replied with a grin. "Turns out I'm pretty good at them." When she left, Rex curled up beside the bed, his breathing matching the slow rise and fall of his master's chest. The rain eased into silence, and the city outside began to fade into the muted gold of late afternoon. For the first time in years, Jack Miller didn't feel entirely alone, and neither did Emily Parker. A week after Jack's release from the hospital, Denver had slipped back into its usual rhythm. The hum of traffic, the whistle of distant trains, and the occasional barking of dogs echoing through alleyways. The air carried the faint tang of snow waiting to fall, the season edging toward winter. Jack's body was still weak, but his stubborn spirit refused to rest. He had insisted on returning to his small rented room above an old body shop on the city's east side, a place that smelled of oil, dust, and solitude. Emily Parker stood outside the creaking door, holding a grocery bag in one hand and Rex's leash in the other. The hallway light flickered above her, buzzing like an insect caught between glass. She hesitated before knocking, not out of doubt, but from the quiet worry of someone who cared more than she meant to. When Jack opened the door, he looked smaller somehow, though his frame was still strong. His hair had grown uneven during the hospital stay, and his face, though cleaner, carried the pale exhaustion of recovery. The room behind him was cramped. One window, one narrow bed, a desk cluttered with tools and half-fixed radios. There was no sign of comfort, except for Rex's old blanket in the corner. "Didn't think you'd actually find this place," Jack said, his voice gruff but touched with surprise. Emily smiled lightly. "You're not that hard to track down. The nurse said you'd probably try to disappear again." He chuckled under his breath. Nurse Clara always did talk too much. "I brought you some food," she said, stepping inside before he could argue. "And I'm going to help clean. Don't bother saying no." Jack looked ready to protest, then sighed. "You don't give up easy, do you?" "Not when someone's living like they're allergic to sunlight," she replied, already setting groceries on the counter. As she worked, Rex trotted around the small room, sniffing corners and wagging his tail, clearly pleased to be home. Emily picked up a pile of newspapers, revealing a box shoved halfway beneath the bed. You keeping secrets under here? She asked playfully. Jack's expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Old stuff. Nothing worth much. Emily tugged the box free anyway, carefully, as if she sensed the weight of what it held. Inside were a few mementos, a rusted dog tag, a faded photograph, and a small envelope sealed but yellowed with time. She lifted the photo first. It showed a younger Jack in military uniform, smiling awkwardly, one arm around a boy of maybe 8 or 9. The boy had Jack's sharp jaw and bright eyes, his hair sticking up in messy defiance. "Your son?" Emily asked softly. Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. "Daniel. Haven't seen him in 15 years. She glanced at the letter. "Can I?" "Go ahead," he said after a long silence, his voice low. Emily slid the folded paper from the envelope and began to read. The handwriting was rough, pressed too hard against the page, like every word had to fight its way out. "Danny, I don't have much to give you. No house, no money, no medals that matter outside the army. All I've got is my word and the dog that's kept me alive longer than I deserved. If you ever find this, I want you to know I'm proud of you, even if you don't remember me that way. I went to war to protect a future that had your name on it. Maybe that's enough." By the time she finished, the room had gone completely still. Jack stared at the floor, his hands folded tight in his lap. "I never mailed it," he said. "Didn't know where he was. And after a while, I didn't think I had the right to." Emily's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Instead, she folded the letter back carefully. "You still love him," she said quietly. "That's all that matters." Jack exhaled, his breath shaking. "You don't understand. He stopped answering when I called. Guess I reminded him of all the things I couldn't be." "You were trying," she said. "That counts more than you think." For a long while, neither spoke. The steady ticking of a small clock on the shelf filled the silence. Then, with a decisive breath, Emily reached for her phone. "What are you doing?" Jack asked. "Something you should have done years ago," she said. "I'm posting this." Before he could stop her, she snapped a photo of the picture and the letter, adding a caption to a local veterans forum. "Looking for Daniel Miller. His father, a veteran named Jack, has been searching for him. He still keeps his letter. Maybe someone knows where he is." Jack frowned but didn't argue. "No one's going to care about some old mechanic and his mistakes." "You'd be surprised," she said. "People care more than you think. Sometimes they just need to be reminded how." Over the next few days, Emily stopped by every evening to check on Jack and Rex. She'd bring soup, small talk, or just silence. Jack would grumble but always looked relieved when she came. On the 4th night, as she was cleaning the counter, her phone buzzed. A notification flashed across the screen. Her breath caught. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling. Someone replied. He looked up sharply. "What?" She handed him the phone. On the forum was a message. "My name is Daniel Miller. I've been looking for my father for years. He served in Afghanistan. I think you found him." Jack's hand shook as he read. His eyes darted across the words again and again, as if afraid they'd vanish. "That can't be real," he whispered. Emily smiled, tears blurring her vision. "It's real. He's in Kansas now. Says he's willing to come to Denver." Jack leaned back, closing his eyes, the sound of his heartbeat filling his ears, louder than any monitor ever could. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a stranger. Outside, the snow had finally begun to fall, quiet, steady, and pure, covering the tired city in a thin blanket of white. Rex lay by the window, watching flakes drift against the glass, his tail thumping softly as if he too understood that something long lost had just found its way home. The Denver afternoon unfolded under a sky brushed with pale orange and fading gold, the kind of light that softened the edges of the world and made even the hospital courtyard look forgiving. The air carried a faint chill, hinting that winter still lingered beyond the horizon, but the day itself felt kind, as if it understood what it was about to witness. Jack Miller sat on a wooden bench near the courtyard fountain, his posture upright but his body still frail beneath his loose jacket. His cheeks had regained a touch of color since the heart attack, and the oxygen tubes were finally gone. The faint wind tousled his graying hair, and his hands, rough and scarred from years of work, rested in his lap as though holding something invisible. A prayer, a hope, a memory not yet ready to fade. Beside him sat Rex, the ever-watchful German shepherd, his fur gleaming under the sunlight. The dog's amber eyes stayed fixed on the hospital gate, his tail wagging in short bursts of anticipation. Emily Parker stood a few paces away, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm. She wore a long beige coat over her work clothes, her auburn hair catching the last glints of light. Her face showed the kind of calm patience that hides a storm of emotion beneath. Over the past week, she had seen Jack go from disbelief to sleepless hope, from fear to quiet preparation. And now, as the minutes ticked closer, she found herself holding her breath without realizing it. The taxi stopped by the curb, and a tall figure stepped out, carrying a worn leather bag. Daniel Miller was in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and the kind of stance that came from long hours standing at construction sites. His hair was chestnut brown, neatly cut, and his face bore a resemblance to Jack's younger self. The same jawline, the same deep-set eyes, though his were cautious, layered with years of unanswered questions. His skin had the faint tan of someone who worked outdoors, and there was a small scar along his temple, a souvenir from a childhood bicycle crash that Jack remembered too well. Daniel hesitated at the gate, scanning the courtyard until his eyes found the man on the bench. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, his feet carried him forward. Jack rose to meet him, every step careful but certain. The world around them faded, the hum of the fountain, the passing footsteps of nurses, the wind stirring the dry leaves. Father and son stood a breath apart, 2 lifetimes of distance suspended in the space between them. Jack spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "You look just like your mother when you're trying not to cry." Daniel's throat tightened. "You look smaller than I remember." Jack smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Age'll do that." Then Daniel stepped forward, and the years dissolved. He wrapped his arms around his father, holding him like a man anchoring himself to something he thought he'd lost forever. Jack's grip trembled but didn't let go. For a long moment, they simply stood there, breathing in the reality of each other. Rex barked softly, circling them before pressing his head against both their legs, tail wagging furiously. Emily turned away, blinking back tears, pretending to be fascinated by the clouds. When they finally sat, Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I read your letter," he said quietly. "Emily sent me a picture of it. I don't know how to thank her." Jack looked toward her. "You can start by telling her she's the reason this old man's heart still beats." Emily smiled, shaking her head. "All I did was listen to a dog bark in the rain." Daniel chuckled. "That dog has good instincts." He reached down to scratch Rex behind the ears. Guess you kept him alive too. The conversation shifted gently after that. Awkward at first, then easier, warmer. Daniel spoke about his life in Kansas. Working construction, fixing houses, never quite settling. He admitted he'd tried to reach out once, years ago, but couldn't find an address that worked. Jack listened quietly, occasionally nodding, occasionally wiping at his eyes when he thought no one noticed. As the sun dipped lower, the courtyard bathed in amber light. Daniel asked, "So what now, Dad?" Jack paused. The question hung heavy. For so long, now had meant just surviving another day. But Emily, standing there with Rex at her feet, seemed to make the question easier to answer. "I think," Jack said slowly, "we start small, something good, something that helps someone other than ourselves." A few weeks later, that idea took root. Emily found an unused warehouse on the edge of town, a place once meant for storing car parts, but now forgotten. The owner, Mr. Leonard Brooks, a retired police officer with silver hair and a weathered face, agreed to lease it cheap after hearing Jack's story. Brooks was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, his right leg stiff from an old injury. He spoke with the blunt kindness of someone who'd seen the world at its worst and still believed it could get better. "You folks want to help soldiers and dogs? Hell, that's worth more than rent." Together, they cleaned, painted, and repaired the building until it no longer looked like a warehouse but like something alive. They hung a small wooden sign over the entrance, "Rex's Hope," hand-painted by Emily herself. Rex became the star of the place, greeting every visitor with calm dignity. They trained shelter dogs to assist veterans battling loneliness, trauma, or simply the ache of being forgotten. Jack used his mechanic's precision to build agility obstacles and feeding stations. Daniel handled the logistics and outreach, his natural charisma drawing volunteers. Emily managed the finances and the emotional pulse of the center, always knowing when someone needed a kind word more than advice. On opening day, a small crowd gathered: veterans, families, reporters, and a few curious locals. Jack stood at the front, wearing a clean shirt for once, a simple smile on his face. "This place," he said into the microphone, "isn't about saving lives. It's about reminding people, and animals, that they still matter." Emily stood beside him, eyes glistening. Daniel clapped a hand on his father's shoulder, pride softening his usually guarded expression. Rex barked once, perfectly timed, as if sealing the promise. The crowd laughed, and the sound carried out into the afternoon like a blessing. Months later, when the first snow fell over Denver, the sun broke through in streaks of crimson and gold, lighting up the courtyard of Rex's Hope. Jack sat on the porch steps, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Emily and Daniel were inside, preparing dinner for the volunteers, and Rex lay across Jack's feet, his fur rising and falling with each slow breath. Jack looked out toward the horizon, where the sun dipped behind the Rockies, painting the sky in shades of fire. "We made it, boy," he murmured. Rex's ears twitched, tail thumping once against the porch. Emily stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel. "You talking to the dog again?" Jack smiled. He's a better listener than most people. Daniel joined them with 3 steaming mugs. "Then I guess we'll just have to keep up." The 3 of them sat together as the day melted into twilight. A soldier, a son, a woman who'd refused to walk away, and a dog who had never left. Above them, the sky burned orange, then deepened into the calm blue of peace finally earned. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or light from heaven. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, in the bark of a faithful dog, in the kindness of a stranger who stops when no one else will, in the reunion of a father and a son who thought they'd lost each other forever. Jack, Emily, Daniel, and Rex found their way back not because life was easy, but because grace had never stopped watching over them. It was God's gentle hand, unseen yet undeniable, that guided their steps through the storm toward healing, forgiveness, and love. And maybe that's the real miracle, that in a world full of noise and indifference, a single act of compassion can still open the door for redemption. You don't need to be a hero to change a life. Sometimes all it takes is listening, reaching out, or believing that God can turn even our darkest nights into dawn. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment about the kindness you've witnessed, or the miracle you're still waiting for. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us. Faith still moves mountains, love still heals, and God still works through ordinary people every single day. May God bless you and your family, and may He fill your life with small miracles, the kind that change everything when you least expect it.